David is, I'm going to just call you like a data guru in the world of, as horrible as it sounds, all things to do with school shootings and the like. And I've seen your Substack and all this stuff, but can you just give everybody a little bit of a rundown of how you're in this world?
Yeah, I'm a professor at Idaho State University. I teach risk management and data analysis and emergency management. My entire career was in Homeland Security and intelligence and emergency services. And I was actually in a Homeland Security think tank program sitting in a classroom when the Parkland shooting happened.
Really?
Whoa.
And I had been to dozens of briefings about the Boston Marathon bombing where 2 people died. There were 17 kids dead at this high school in Parkland. And I had never been to any sort of Homeland Security planning, briefing, exercise, training, or anything at the national level about a school shooting.
Yeah.
So I was in this think tank program. I wanted to know everything about the issue. And that's when I created a database of every shooting I could find on school property back to the 1960s.
So you trace back all of these horrible incidents. You put together what is like the preeminent database of all this information. And when you do that, you do get some insight, certainly, as to why is this happening? Why does it seem to be a fairly American experience? And a lot of very big questions that we'll try to touch on at some point. But in this situation in particular, we have another student who leaves behind after unthinkable horror on this school that was unleashed on these poor kids. Another student that leaves, or another shooter that leaves behind, like, one of these manifestos. And everybody wants a simple answer, like, what was the motivation behind this person? The reason why I said I was frustrated at the start of the show today is because that is not an easy answer with somebody like this particular shooter in Minneapolis. They literally left a treasure trove of information for anybody to glom onto. Like, there was stuff about Jews, there was stuff about hating Trump, there was, transgender, there's all sorts of things that are sort of flung at the map in a manifesto like this, where anybody can take from it what they want to, and you sort of end up walking away with nothing that you can fix. But did you look through some of the stuff that's come out after this, and what, if anything did you take away from this person?
Well, unfortunately, every time that this happens in terms of a deliberate planned attack at the school, it's essentially the same situation that plays out over and over. People want a really simple explanation. A simple explanation would be there's a violent, scary, psychotic person, and if we can just keep them away from the school, if we can just have a stronger door and a bigger fence, then we can keep this scary, deranged outsider away. Unfortunately, the reality of looking at shootings at schools, I've cataloged more than 3,000 back to the 1960s. About 230 of those are a deliberately planned attack, like yesterday, with the intent to harm as many people as possible. And this is where it becomes a very complicated issue. They are almost always committed by current students or former students at the school. So it's somebody who knows the layout of the building, has been trained in the lockdown drills or emergency procedures. They know what times students are going to be in different places. And often, if it's a current student, they're allowed to be in the school. They are permitted to be there. If you have biometric monitoring or key cards or badges or access control, they're allowed to be there in the school.
Yeah.
So this becomes complicated because it is a person who's intimately familiar with the building and has a strong connection to it, who almost always commits a school shooting.
Right, which makes them all the more dangerous when that information just falls in line.
It sounds like a weird parallel to that revelation we had not so long back when we were kids, everything was stranger danger, stranger danger. All of your risk is coming from the outside, and it turns out more family members are the problem. Like you're saying that, like, because they said, "Oh, we've spent all this money protecting the school, we've spent all this money beefing up security, but it doesn't matter because it's the ones that are supposed to be here that are causing all the issues and then shooting up the place."
Yeah, that's exactly the problem. I think it goes back to, that same idea in the 80s and 90s, watch out for the stranger in the white van.
Right.
That's a really simple thing. Saying, you actually need to watch out for the strange uncle or the babysitter or the neighbor is very inconvenient because there's not an easy way to deal with that. It's the same way with schools. If you train somebody in the emergency procedures, the assumption is that they are going to be somebody that you're protecting. But in most cases, active shooter drills are actually a tutorial and a rehearsal for how to commit a school shooting. If I was in charge of the Department of Education, if I was in charge of a school system, I would never hold any sort of active shooter drill or publicize any sort of emergency procedures, because you are giving the person who's most likely to commit the shooting the playbook for exactly how to do it.
Right. How the classroom's going to be locked down, what the defensive mechanisms are in place. Again, this is like C-Lane was saying, preparing for an outsider versus an insider, and actually kind of giving away your hands in so many cases here.
David,
and what was a little different yesterday was somebody firing only from the exterior of the building. Looking at those 230 planned attacks back to the 1960s, about 75% of the shootings begin and end in the same room, which is another really complicated concept when you think about fortifying classrooms, having a one-way door lock on the classroom door, maybe having a ballistic chalkboard. If the shooting begins and ends in the same room, all that you're doing is fortifying the classroom against police from getting in.
Right. Yeah. Then it becomes you're trapped in your own prison. What were we going to say, C-Lab?
David, with all that you just said in mind about the active shooter drills and saying that you would remove them from schools, would you still recommend that they be done with teachers and with adult staff so they have a drill in mind and they have a plan in mind, and just don't tell the kids about it, because that actually makes the kids better, for lack of a better term, school shooters?
Yeah, absolutely. And this teachers can only have, really cursory short training in the emergency procedures as well. If you go to an arena, if you go to a concert venue, if you go to a shopping mall, you as the visitor there, or you as the occupant of a commercial building, have never done the drills. It's up to the staff that manages that facility to direct you for what you're going to do during an emergency. So a thing with across the security industry is you want to have more randomness, less predictability, and more flexibility in the way that you can respond to a variety of different types of emergencies. And as soon as you have a prescribed plan, then that gives your adversary an opportunity to start finding and identifying the weakest points in it.
Yeah. Somebody on chat has an interesting point here. I think Arnaud on YouTube says there's a movie called Run, Hide, Fight about this exact thing. They go into details about some of these stories. Now, just the idea of run, hide, fight, in terms of me watching these stories over the years, going way back to Columbine and before that, that seems to be kind of a new tact that some of these places are taking, where they're telling the students, like, your life is on the line. Run, hide, fight, do whatever you can do, but understand that this is a situation that deserves all of the attention in the world, and anything you could do in these situations, even fighting your way out, could be important. Is that something that changed, like the strategy changed along the timeline somewhere?
The first viral post that I ever wrote about this topic was in 2017, and it was the morning after the Las Vegas Harvest Festival shooting. And I was actually sitting in a Department of Homeland Security office, and I was there early, and I just put out, 1,000 or so word article on Medium. It was called "When You Can't Run, Hide, or Fight," because I was looking at all the videos from Las Vegas and realizing that you're at a large outdoor concert and somebody on the 40th floor is shooting at you.
Yeah.
You can't outrun the bullets. There's nowhere to hide, and there's no way for you to fight somebody who's 40 stories above you. And so I broke down lots of different venues where those three options, even though people were taught them, aren't viable. One of them is a church, where you have usually one door in the back and all of the pews in front of it. Another is a large shopping mall with your open areas. A movie theater, like the Aurora theater shooting. There's not a scenario where you can be sitting in the middle of the theater and you're going to run, hide, or fight from somebody firing a rifle at you from in front of the screen. What's interesting is once you go down the rabbit hole on this, Run, Hide, Fight was created by a Hollywood production company that had a grant from the city of Houston in 2008 to create a PSA. There has never been an empirical study or research or anything about whether that is the appropriate set of actions to take, modeling it in different scenarios. The same with lockdowns. There's never been empirical evidence that you save lives during a lockdown. Those are just concepts that get socialized. They are very easy slogans to remember.
Terrifying that you're stating all these
practically
facts.
They don't do a lot.
Yeah, that's, it's interesting. That's kind of one of those things. I'm always talking about this stuff where it's like, hey, we do these things because we've always done these things. And when it comes down to it, there's like no actual empirical evidence that suggests these strategies are useful, or certainly in the most recent case here that it would have done anything, which I think is just another log in the fire of everything that makes these stories so frustrating. One thing that I have seen, and tell me, you know far more about the numbers on this than I ever will, but one thing that I have seen down the line in so many of these stories that are similar to the planned attacks like we just saw at this school in Minnesota is that almost to a person, they seem to have a fascination with other mass shooters and a very, very deep knowledge of other mass shooters that then inspire them to do what they're doing.
Yeah, I'm working on an article about that right now because in the online, it's called TCC, True Crime Communities. There are private Discord chats. There's a lot of social media activity where people talk about school shootings, people talk about mass shootings, people glorify the attacks by previous shooters. Mm-hmm. And just last year, for the first time, so there was a 15-year-old girl who committed a surprise attack inside another Christian school in Madison, Wisconsin. Mm-hmm. So that was a surprise attack that started inside the classroom.
I remember that.
She opened fire and then killed herself before the first police officer arrived. 2 months later, in Nashville at Antioch High School, there was a 17-year-old, and he committed a surprise attack at the cafeteria during lunch and also killed himself before the first police officer arrived. It turns out they were both in the same Discord true crime community chat. They were having direct interactions with each other. And the early evidence is that the shooter yesterday was also part of that same true crime community chat. And there are at least 4 other mass shootings that were connected to that same Discord group, 3 of which were averted earlier this year. One targeting a government building in Florida, another targeting government buildings in Southern California.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily the act of the shooting that would inspire the next person. It's more that there's a community that can build and shape impressionable teens into eventually becoming a shooter.
We're talking with David Riedman, who is the top data guru of all things in the world of school shootings. And when we see something like we saw this week with the Minnesota school shootings, there's a lot of different things that happen. I get frustrated watching afterwards where half of the people are like, he's on your team, and the other half's like, no, he's on your team. And everybody kind of sorts out what they think the motive was, and then we move on and nothing happens. We don't get anywhere. And I was trying to find some commonalities in my world. And my world is I've, for a long time, operated in some of these places on the internet where a lot of other people don't go. I've seen these places where a lot of strange people congregate. And I tweeted about this yesterday. This is what I wanted to ask David about. So let me start with this. I said, wondering where shooters come from yesterday on Twitter/X. I said, one of the biggest blind spots in modern culture is that most normies have no idea where the crazy people are radicalized. Most normal people, understandably so, have no idea what 009 or Order of Nine Angels is. They have never heard of 764, which is another group. Most normal people haven't heard of Kiwi Farms, much less Skibbity Farms, or the discords with many of these deranged people come from. Maybe they've heard of 4chan, but 8kun is not on their radar. Most people don't know there are hundreds, maybe thousands of very obscure Telegram channels where very disturbed people congregate. It sounds like a different language to you, probably, but it never fails that these shooters tend to come from these places. These deranged people hatch in these shadow communities and unleash their nihilistic worldview on convenient victims. There's a generational gap here where those in charge have very little idea what's happening online until the next shooting. So the idea here is there are these communities, and it's not always the case with these school shootings, but it is a lot of times the case that there's these communities with very, very mentally ill people who are all sort of, radicalizing each other. And it's hard to explain to outsiders, David, but have you seen the stories about this Order of Nine Angles and 764 and those types of groups?
Yeah, there are numerous groups and places and websites and discussion boards where people discuss a huge amount of violent content. And I think what's really important is that many of these services have end-to-end encryption. Many of these services are private chats that require an invite from somebody in the chat room. And that's not something that a random school official or random local police officer, or in many cases, even somebody in federal law enforcement is going to be able to find in a sea of thousands or tens of thousands of different chats. But then you can't break the encryption necessarily, or you can't get an invite, or the servers are housed overseas, so there's no way to subpoena or take any action. I think a really good example of this is a shooting that didn't get a lot of attention at the start of the year was at Perry Middle and High School in Perry, Iowa, a small community about 40 miles outside of Des Moines. Mm-hmm. And on the first day back from winter break, a student went into the bathroom early before classes started, and he got on the Discord school massacre discussions. And he chatted with some people. He said, I'm finally going to do this. They said, you've got this. You're going to do it. He took a shotgun out of his bag. He took a pistol out of his bag. He walked out into the hallway. He killed the principal. He killed a 14-year-old student. He wounded 7 others. And then he killed himself before an alert even went out to the police. Mm-hmm. That Discord chat that he was in, yeah, it's a predictable title. There are many chats like that all over the place. You can't get into it without an invite. And it would be very, very hard for any sort of police officer in this small rural Iowa community to ever stumble across these messages. Yeah. So it has to be the parents and it has to be peers that are going to notice something that nobody else is going to know.
Yeah. I mean, the shooter in Minnesota was 23 years old. But I always find it strange. Like, is it possible that there was nobody in this person's life that saw that they were amassing weapons, that saw that there was some sort of change in their behavior? Nobody picked up on any of these things. It seems like it would be something that if you were a parent or a sibling or somebody that would show up on your radar. But in so many cases, the families aren't that last stopping system to prevent this from happening in these schools. They just don't seem to be good at detecting this.
Well, that's only when it goes wrong. I have a paper that's under final review for publication right now, where with another professor, we studied 125 averted school shootings. Uh-huh. So somebody that had a plan, intent, and capability to carry out an attack. And for the first time ever on those 125 cases, we mapped the pathway for somebody to avert the shooting.
Interesting.
And we found out that 85% of the time, it was either a classmate or a family member that made the tip to police that averted a very real attack from taking place. And when you think about the numbers, there's 1 or 2 kind of bad rampage school shootings every year. This is 125 very, very severe cases that were averted in the last 5 years. Mm-hmm. So we're averting them at more than 50 times the rate that one actually happens. And then there's lots of cases that get averted and there's never any news about it. So people are being successful at stopping these from happening.
That's super interesting. You never think about the other side of the coin there because it just doesn't make waves. It doesn't get the attention. I'm glad you're looking into that. Being that you have been, David, we're talking to David Reedman, who is a guru, all things school shooting data analysis. You've got a very, very, very solid knowledge base of the history of the United States and these school shootings. If you were given ultimate power, do you think there are some concrete things that would stop these stories from coming up over and over again in the United States? Or is it just one of those things that's like a terrible fact of life that we have to deal with?
No, it's absolutely not a terrible fact of life, especially because it doesn't happen in other countries and it doesn't happen with equal distribution across the United States. When there are the planned kind of rampage school attacks, they're most often in small communities, small suburban or rural communities, and they're most often in the Midwest and South. There's a study that we talked about on the last episode of my podcast, the Back to School Shootings podcast, which was a study of 100 rampage attacks back to the 60s. And the author of the study looked at the family factors and the home environment of all of these shooters. 98% of these deliberately planned attacks, the shooter had easy access to accessible guns in their home. Mm-hmm. 98%. That means the guns were not locked. They were left available. They were left loaded. Yeah. We know from retail, we know from behavioral economics, if you put a tiny bit of friction into anything, it could be a supermarket where there's a long line, people will leave. People won't buy the thing that they were meaning to buy. Your cart on Amazon won't check out. You never come back for that item. Tiny bits of friction stop somebody from doing things in their life.
Yeah.
So if you can just put a gun in a safe, have a mandate, if you have kids in the house, if you have teens in the house, your gun has to be kept in a safe that they don't know the code to and they can't access. I believe that could prevent almost every school shooting from happening.
What do you think about heavier punishment for parents or those in charge of these weapons when that does happen?
That doesn't help the victims who've been killed. Mm-hmm. And there's across, I studied criminal justice for my PhD, and there's not a clear deterrent from harsh punishment. People are very bad at perceiving risk. I mean, that's the reason that somebody would leave, say, a loaded gun in the drawer of their bedroom, even though they have kids in the house.
Well, they think it's for their protection.
The likelihood in that incident is that a young child is going to accidentally shoot one of their siblings, mm-hmm. or somebody's going to be shot during a domestic dispute in the house. So people don't perceive risk. There's this 1 in a million chance of an armed intruder coming into your house. But meanwhile, the leading cause of death for children is firearms. The majority of those are unintentional shootings.
What do you think, David? You've obviously studied a lot of these things, and to the point where you're seemingly you got this stuff locked in the brain, pulling it out from memory. What do you think when you look at all of the different rampage shootings over the years that you've studied and kind of compiled data on is the most overlooked thing in the public eye that they have in common?
It's back to the lockdown drills and the school procedures. Is the vast majority, in the almost 80% of school shootings are committed by either a current student or a recently former student at the school.
Well, with that in mind,
almost all of the discourse is around keeping an outsider away from the school, but this is something committed by somebody within the school community.
With that in mind, with the idea of getting rid of the lockdown drills, because they're sometimes more educational than they are helpful, do you, as a person who publishes articles and content about this subject, have to second guess yourself when you post? Like you mentioned the article you posted after the Vegas shooting about, like, here's a list of places that you cannot run, hide, and fight from. And at any point before you hit publish on that article, did you have to go, am I writing a list of best places to shoot up?
Yeah. Unfortunately, that's the double-edged sword with this research. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be doing it. We have that discussion around, I've done a podcast around each manifesto from a school shooter when it comes out, breaking it down. And are you glorifying the person? Are you giving their words an audience by doing that? You are, but you're also giving every listener an insight into what to look out for, what to watch out for, how to change policies, how to potentially prevent the next attack. I think back to terrorism post 9/11, every single book about terrorism, every single report about the Boston Marathon bombing is also a template for how to commit a better bombing next time.
There's no way around
but that. Doesn't mean that you don't do it.
David, one last question for you. One of the things you hear meme-wise over and over and over and over again, somebody mentioned this in chat, was there's nothing we could do about this, says the only major country in the world where this happens over and over and over again when you see these school shootings. Why does there, unless that's some sort of misnomer in and of itself, why does there seem to be a real American aspect to this whole school shooting phenomenon?
Overall, I think it just comes down to the accessibility of firearms and the accessibility of firearms to children. And that's much different in other countries. In places where they are accessible, there have been school shootings in Brazil and in Russia and in the Eastern Bloc countries and a few in Europe, but they don't have the same frequency because there's not the same accessibility. And this is not to say that people should not own guns. People can own however many guns that they want, but have that gun in a safe that no child or teenager in the house can access.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's so interesting to actually hear some different perspective on all this. And it seems like a lot of that information doesn't break through. Honestly, you just hear so many people with like their own partisan arguments about this. And then they use the terrible, terrible prop of kids that are dead in a classroom. And then we don't seem to get anywhere. But when you actually get into the data like you're doing, you see this from a very, very different perspective. Are you hopeful that this is going to get better, or do you think it's going to get worse?
And overall, I'm hopeful, because back to the study of averted shootings, there are far more very serious situations where somebody has a manifesto, has access to weapons, has made a plan, and there are far more that get averted than actually take place. And the last thing I'll leave your audience with is there's two researchers that I work with in Minnesota, right in the community where this happened, Jill Peterson and James Densley from the Violence Project. They wrote a book where they interviewed either in person or through letters or talked to family members of convicted mass shooters. And they asked each of them the same question, said, is there anyone who could have stopped this shooting from happening? And they got the same answer from every one of those mass shooters. They all said anyone could have stopped this shooting, because when somebody's spiraling down this path to crisis, these are violent public suicides by somebody who thinks that they have no purpose to live anymore and everything that's wrong with their life is based on that school. And the school is the source of every one of their problems. So they want a violent public suicide in that school. If any person shows them kindness, connects with them, tries to connect them with resources, it completely breaks that internal narrative that this is nothing but a place of grievance. And it just takes one little action to take somebody off that path to violence.
Wow. Very, very interesting stuff. David, thank you for joining us today. We appreciate you answering our questions. We'd love to keep you on board for, unfortunately, when these stories do pop up on the show, it's always good to have people to go to. So we'd love to keep you on board when something like this pops up, if God forbid it does again.
Yeah, unfortunately, this is a extraordinarily depressing topic that I work on every single day.
How are you doing, man?
Yeah, you all right? You okay?
Yeah, when these incidents do happen, it's the one opportunity when the public pays attention to make some sort of meaningful change. And if that means one person decides, you know what, I'm going to take the gun from the dresser and I'm going to put it in the safe, maybe that's a life that's saved. If it's a person that reaches out to that kid in crisis that, nobody's talking to at school, maybe that's the one act of kindness that takes that kid off the pathway to violence.
All right. Well, we appreciate the time, David. Thank you so much. And by the way, where could people follow what work you're doing here?
You can find me on Substack, the School Shooting Data Analysis and Reports. You can also search K-12 School Shooting Database, and it's the first thing that comes up on Google.
Thank you so much, David. We appreciate the time, man.
Thank you very much.
All right, there he goes. See, I think that was super useful. Like, to actually get somebody who knows that much about all the data and takes all the things that you've thought of your whole life and then twists it on its head. It's like, wait, hold on. Think about it from this perspective. Get these kind of messages out there. Very, very helpful.